Good morning. Today we are continuing with our objectives with CO2, course objective number 2. I can write rational numbers as both fractions and decimals. So we're going to be going back and forth between a fraction and a decimal, having the same value. It equals the same amount, but we're going to write it as a fraction or as a decimal. In addition to knowing the categories of our number system, it is also important to be able to write values in various ways. For example, sometimes a value is better understood as a decimal, $2.75, instead of a fraction, 11/4 of a dollar. Okay, 11/4 of a dollar doesn't really make sense. We'd have to turn it into that decimal to understand. Or sometimes it's better to have it as a fraction. Like you need 3/8 of a cup of sugar instead of 0.375 cups of sugar. So sometimes we need to be able to convert it from a decimal to a fraction or a fraction to a decimal. So to convert means you to write a value a different way. So when you're converting it, it's the same value. You're just writing it in a different way. It's the same amount. It just looks different. So integers to fractions and decimals. An integer defined as a non-fraction and non-decimal can still be written as a fraction and decimal by writing the integer as a numerator over a denominator of 1. So if we have 7, that's the same as saying 7 over 1 because that fraction bar means divide. What's 7 divided by 1? 7. Okay, so we can turn a whole number into a fraction by putting a 1 underneath it. So now it's a fraction. It can also be that whole number or an integer if it's negative, but we can turn it into that fraction. Or writing the integer with a decimal point followed by 0. 0/10. It's the same value of 7. 7 and 0/10 is the same as 7, but now it's got a decimal. So here are some other examples. If I have an integer of 4, what would my fraction look like? James?
4
over 1.
4 over 1.
Okay.
I forgot the word.
Yep. What would my decimal look like? Tegan? 4.0. What if it's a negative number? What would my fraction look like? Emily? Negative 9 over 1. What would a decimal look like? Tatum?
Negative 9. Negative 9.
Negative 9.0, because we want a 0 in the 10th place. So we can take that integer and turn it into a fraction or a decimal pretty easily. Okay. So now a fraction to a decimal, this one's going to take a little bit more thinking. So write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100, and then the numerator is going to become the decimal. And when we first hear that, we go, whoa, wait, what? Write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100, the numerator is the decimal. Let's walk through what that looks like, and it's going to make a lot more sense. So if we have 4/5 is our fraction, what should my next step be? Evelyn? I want to write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100.
You're going to multiply by 20.
I'm going to multiply by 20 Because to go from 5 to 100, I'm multiplying by 20. So whatever I do to my denominator, I have to do to my numerator if it's an equivalent fraction. So what is 4 times 20? 80. Okay, so I still have a fraction. Is it going to be easy to change 80 hundredths to a decimal?
Yes.
Oh, because my decimal places, I have my 0, and then I have my tenths, and then I have hundredths is that second decimal place, right? So if it's 80 hundredths, what would that decimal look like, Chance?
Can't we just write it at 8 as 8 tenths? Yeah.
So technically, this is, not everything goes into the tenths. So 4/5, we're changing into hundredths, so we can write it as 80 hundredths. Chance is right. We could have said, you know what, 4/5, I can change that into tenths, times it by 2, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 tenths is that. Those are all equivalent of each other. So you are correct on that, but not everything goes into tenths. We can convert a lot more into hundredths than we can into tenths. So that's why we just go straight to the hundredths, so we don't have to, oh, this one isn't gonna work, now I need to try something else. We just go right for that hundredth. Especially when we're working with money, we go to the hundredths because there are 2 decimal places when we work with money. So it's just easier to get in the habit of going to the hundredths, but you are absolutely correct, Chance. 8 tenths would have worked also. Let's do one more example. What if I have 1 and 1/4? What do you think I should do, Evelyn?
First, you multiply 1 times 4 plus 1.
Yeah, first I'm going to make it into an improper fraction. It's a mixed number now. We're going to turn it improper. So to go from a mixed number to improper, we multiply and then we add. So 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. Denominator stays the same. Now, this is why we don't want to just go to the tenths, Chance, because we'll get numbers like 5/4. You can't go into the tenths easily, right? Because 4 doesn't go into 10. That's why 100 is more of the magic number, because more numbers will work with it. So 5/4, what's my next step? Emily?
Multiply 5 plus 5, 25.
Why am I going to multiply it by 25?
Because 25 times 4 equals 70.
25 times 4 is 100. So whatever I do to the denominator, I do to my numerator. 5 times 25 is 125. What do I do next? How do I change 125 hundredths into a decimal, Gus?
Well, I know the answer, but well, 100 hundredths is equivalent to 1. So you got 25 extra hundredths, so it'll be 1 and 25 hundredths.
That is a perfect explanation. 100 hundredths would be 1. There's 25 hundredths more. So 100 100ths gave us the 1 whole number, and then 25 hundredths left over. So 1.25. 1 and 25 hundredths. Okay. That making sense? Once we break it down, that the directions up here make a lot more sense when we go step by step. So, are we good if I erase this to scroll up?
Yeah, this thing at the bottom.
I haven't gotten to the bottom yet. Patience, my friend. Sometimes the trick works, sometimes it doesn't. There we go. All right, decimal to fraction. Write the decimal out to the hundredths place. Write the decimal as a numerator of a fraction with the denominator of 100. Simplify if necessary. So here's some examples. What should I do to convert that decimal to a fraction? 36 hundredths. What do I do for 36 hundredths? Tatum? James?
So 36 will be the numerator, and since it's 100, so you just put 100 on the bottom.
Yeah.
Or the denominator.
Yep. So 36 will be our numerator. 100 is the denominator because it's 36 hundredths. So we can make it look either way. Here's the key part to this. Simplify if necessary. Can we simplify? What can I divide out of the numerator and the denominator? Not 3. I can go bigger than 2. 4. I can divide a 4 out of both. Now, somebody said 3. I can divide 36 by 3, but I can't divide 100 by 3. A bunch of us said, oh, 2, they're both even numbers. So if I divided it by 2, I would say, okay, 36 divided by 2 is 18. 100 divided by 2 is 50. I can go even smaller because they're both even numbers. I know I can divide out another 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 50 divided by 2 is 25. I could have just jumped straight to, I'm going to divide it by 4. 36 divided by 4 is 9. 100 divided by 4 is 25. You get the same answer. But you want to simplify, simplify, simplify until you cannot simplify anymore. So our answer would be 9/25. So to go from 36 hundredths to a fraction, it turns into 9/25. You always want to simplify as much as you can. Here's another example. 4/10. What should I do? What's my first step? Evelyn.
4 is the numerator and 10 is the denominator.
Okay, so Evelyn's just jumping right to the 4/10. But remember, 100 is our magic number. So what I want us to do is get in that habit of saying, okay, 100 is the magic number. I want to fill in a 0 to go out to the 100th place. Then what am I going to do, Evelyn?
I can put it as 40 as the denominator, and the numerator, and 100 as the denominator.
So I want it to be 40 hundredths. Can I simplify that? What can I divide out of 40 and 100? Who can find the greatest common factor of 40 and 100? Evan.
5?
We can go bigger. I could divide 5 out, but that would give me 8/20. So I can simplify that even more. What could I divide out? 3 up. I can go bigger. 4/10. I could still go smaller than that. So what else? Audrey. 40 divided by 20 is 2. 100 divided by 20 is 5. So 2/5 would be my answer. If you have a smaller factor that you divide out, you just have to simplify a few more times till you get all the way down to 2/5. On the bottom, you will not be able to use a calculator on this section of the test, but you can check your answer by calculating the fraction. So on the test, you're not using a calculator, but as you're doing your work, here's how you can check your answer. Did I simplify it all the way down as much as I can? So if we have 3/5, what did I say the fraction bar means? Division. This fraction bar means I'm going to divide. So 3 divided by 5. So on my calculator, I would do 3 divided by 5, and I would see if the answer I get equals the decimal point that I came up with. Because if we work through it and we want to put it to 100, so that's times 20. 3 times 20 is 60. So that would be 60 hundredths. If you use your calculator and you said 3 divided by 5, you would get 0.6. That's how you can check, am I doing my math correctly? On the test, you're not using the calculator because we want you to know the steps. We don't want you just to use a calculator because then you're not learning it. But you can check your answers with your homework to make sure you're doing it correctly. So this part is saying, hey, here's a way to check your homework. Am I on the right track? I need to know how to do the math for the test. No calculators on the test for this one. Make sense? So somebody said, I don't understand this last part. Does that make sense now? Thumbs up. Does it make sense? Thumbs down if you're not getting. Okay, Christopher. Do you understand how to do the steps that we've been doing? The fraction to the decimal? Okay. So the way to check if you got it right is to use your calculator. So pull your calculator up, Christopher. Shh, oh, voices are off. I'm not sure. Oh, here's my calculator. So if you use your calculator, here, let's do this. I'll use mine up here. To check 3/5, I said it was 3 divided by 5. And we can see it even looks like a fraction. It looks like 3/5. 3 divided by 5 looks like 3/5. And if we hit equal, we get that 0.60. So that's just, this is a way to check your answer. Did I do it correctly? Okay, so this is just a checkpoint. I can use the calculator to check. So when we see our fraction, we know the numerator goes first, then divide, then the denominator. That's my fraction. I know my fraction bar means I'm dividing. My answer to get it to a decimal. So it's converting from fraction to decimal super easy, but I want you to know the math of it so it makes sense as we get to harder math. Emmeline. On the test, on this objective, you cannot use a calculator to check it. Nope. Not on the test. On the homework, you can check to make sure you're doing it correctly. So when you get to the test, you say, I know what I'm doing because I was doing it correctly on the homework. So on the test for this objective, there is no calculator. Audrey. The different objectives will tell us if we can use them on calculators on the test or not. Okay, so I'll let you know when we get towards that test part. Please stop with the talking. Let's see what our homework is for today. This was the lesson explanation. This next page, you're converting integers to a fraction and a decimal. So if you have an integer, you're going to put both. If you have a decimal, you're going to make a fraction. And if you have a fraction, you're going to make a decimal. And you're going to show your work. You are not going to use the calculator and write an answer. You're going to show the work, and you can check it with your calculator. But you have to show your work. Then we need to match each fraction to its decimal value. So if you need to work it out next to it. So let's do a couple together real quick. 18, what would 18 look like as a fraction? I heard somebody say 1800ths. Why would 18 not be 1800ths? It's a whole number. Tatum, what are we going to put under a whole number? A 1. Remember, it's not a decimal. We don't want to turn it into a hundredth. You put a 1 under our whole number. How would I show 18 as a decimal? 18.0. So when you have that integer, you put a 1 under it to make a fraction. You put a decimal point zero to make it a decimal. The integers are the easy ones. If we have a fraction, how can I change my fraction to a decimal? How would I change 3/4 to a decimal? What do I want my denominator to be? Always go to 100. How did I go from 4 to 100? Times 25. So 3 times 25 is 75. It says show your work. So my showing my work is I put what I was multiplying it by. Okay. We don't want to just do mental math. Show your work. So if you get it wrong, we can see where you went wrong. If we have a decimal, what am I going to do? So look at 0.34. What am I going to do? Gus?
I convert it into a fraction with the denominator of 100.
Denominator of 100. So what's my numerator going to be? Am I done?
No.
Why not? I have to simplify. What can I divide out of 34 that I can divide out of 100? They are both even numbers. So if I'm ever stuck and they're both even numbers, I know I can do a 2. 34 divided by 2 is 17. 100 divided by 2 is 50. Can I simplify even more? Because 17 is a what? Prime number. We talked about those prime numbers. 17 is a prime number, and 17 doesn't go into 50. So I know that that is my final answer. Just a little housekeeping. Circle your final answers so you know. So when you have a bunch of numbers, circle the final one so you know which one to look at when we're correcting. On a test, circle your final answer so I know where to look when I'm correcting. Any questions on today's assignment? Alexis, do you have a question?
With number 2, I thought we had to put it to a decimal. A function to a decimal.
Oh, we didn't finish it. Good catch. Oh my goodness, we did the first step, 75 hundredths. You are correct. We don't want to go from fraction to fraction and stop. We want to put it as a decimal. So now that I have 75 hundredths, Alexis, how do I change that to a decimal? 0.75. Thank you so much for catching that. I did the first step. There were 2 steps. Always make sure you follow through all the steps. I would like to say I was just testing you to see if you catch that one. But even teachers make simple mistakes when we're going too fast. Tatum?
I just want us to simplify, but for like number 9, want us to turn it into a proper function?
Oh, good question. When you have an improper fraction, you should turn it into a proper fraction. Improper fractions should always get turned in. Well, actually, I'm looking at Mr. Schultz's. Okay, so let's look at 2.09. That's like one you were asking about, Tatum, right? Or which one were you asking about?
Negative. Negative 1.
Okay, negative 1.45. So we would say that that is 1 and 45 hundredths. So in order to let's see how we want to do this.
Negative 1?
Yeah, it would be negative 1 and 45 hundredths. So then we would change that to, we're going to simplify the 45 hundredths. We'd simplify. We keep the negative 1 and just simplify the fraction. So that would, you would have to see what you can divide out of both 45 and 100. So you're going to keep it as a mixed number. Evelyn?
1920. 19 doesn't go on 600.
Not supposed to. How do we go from 20 to 100? Whatever we do to our denominator, we have to do to our numerator. Okay, so you're multiplying across, so multiply across with your numerator. Evan, did that answer your question? Or
No, I wanted to do that. Like, I wanted to see.
Oh, you wanted to say it? Yeah, we're just gonna write it out. All right, I'm going to stop the recording here. For anybody listening at home, we hope you are well and hope to see you soon.